along this journey of birth to death and all the changes that occur, right? The ancient Chinese developed systems to map it, and it's codified in the Book of Changes, the I Ching or the Zhou Yi. And they use a series of lines, which are like a solid line. Think of like a toothpick or something. That's considered a yang line. Of course, each person ideally takes that, let's say, more abstract philosophy or general principles, and their practice, right? Literally, the word apply, right, or practical, is to then take those generalized principles that have been distilled from, let's say, culture or nature, right? The observation of these cycles, let's say, and then apply it to your life. And in Confucianism, actually, which is also indigenous Chinese, let's say psycho-spiritual or psycho-spiritual social system. And I was judging our culture, critiquing our culture as being skewed towards excess yang. The archetype of the Buddha became incarnate, right? In Gautama, Siddhartha Gautama, at Bodh Gaya, right, under the tree, under the Bodhi tree. Expanding your awareness of greater consciousness. Consciousness is capital C, and we're all in sort of subsets of capital C consciousness, and some would say that that's God, right? As omniscience, right? Omniscience as capital C consciousness, not just as a doctrine. Okay, love thy neighbor as thyself, right? Because that's more prescriptive, right? And some are proscriptive, right? Don't treat your neighbor as you don't want to be treated, right? It actually comes from a sense of mystical union, right? Where you get into such depths of spiritual attunement, to the ineffable, to the mystery, to the Gnostic, that when you go into that state, you feel in a higher consciousness or incarnate, like um, um, emanation, that the none of these 8 billion other humans are other than thyself. Like we're all doing our best, and some of us are going back to, like Plato or Socrates. Some of us are going back to like Confucius or some of these other traditions to draw from and reconstitute, and then resurrect them in a new way that's relevant, accessible to modern life.
Welcome to the WingChun Workout channel, bringing you content on training for Wing Chun. And this video is brought to you by WingChun Workout, the full solo training programs currently at wingchunworkout.com, or you can check it out at the Wing Chun Patreon. I just want to mention we do have a holiday sale with a discount and some free videos. So go to either Patreon or the website to check those out. All right, and this is the Wing Chun Wisdom Podcast, where
Mm-hmm.
we bring you insight into Wing Chun training, further insight. And my guest today is Sifu Paul Wang. How's it going?
Good. Hello, Seeing Aaron. It's good to be back on your podcast. Look forward to our discussion for today.
Yeah, just a brief introduction to Sifu Paul. I think everyone knows him now, but he's a UC Berkeley grad. He has degrees and background in biology, Chinese medicine, philosophy, acupuncture, and he has a practice in what's the name of the town?
Albany in California,
Albany.
in the San Francisco Bay Area, the East Bay of San Francisco Bay Area.
Right, and you have a website. Dao Center is the name of the
Mm-hmm.
practice, and you can.
Dot com. Yeah.
Mhm. Awesome. So getting that out of the way. Uh, it's the holiday season. uh,
Yes.
so yeah, during this recording, it's almost Christmas time. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
I guess
Mm-hmm.
currently Hanukkah is going on.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is a time for, spirituality, reflection. And we wanted to just bring in that into the context of Wing Chun. So we'll call this episode the Wing Chun spirituality, talking about
Mhm.
some of
Mhm.
the spiritual, I guess, aspects of it, the philosophy, in particular, since it's Asian Chinese martial art. We'll talk about the Chinese philosophy, right?
Mhm.
And part of the philosophy is the religion as well, and see if we can educate people on why we do certain things in the martial arts or Wing Chun, and give them some, I guess, some useful tools that might be helpful, that could carry over into their martial practice or their daily life. Um,
Mhm.
so I think it would be cool to start off. I mentioned it's holiday season, Christmas time, and that kind of aligns with the solstices, right?
Mhm.
So planetary alignments, the sun, all that type of
Mhm.
stuff, season changing, and what you mentioned before in previous, I guess, podcasts is that has some relation to Wing Chun itself, like I guess, the name of Wing Chun,
Yeah.
um, and I guess some background from the, I guess, spiritual or religious aspects. I guess let's start with that. If you could just recap on how
Mhm.
that relates to the meaning of Wing Chun.
Yeah. I think we're here in the northern hemisphere. Um, we are entering the depths. Some traditions call it or cultures call it the midwinter and even festival, right? And that sounds interesting. Festival sounds like celebration, and it's actually the considered the longest, darkest day of the year. Um, Approximately December 20th or December 21st, depending on where you are in the hemisphere, and the longest night, right? So depending on where you are, obviously, if you're right on the equator, then it's always 12 hours day, 12 hours night. But the more latitude, up or down, right, you go during the solstices, then there's more contrast between the length of day and night. So maybe instead of a 12 and 12, it's 14 and 10 or 15 and 9, right? 16 and 8, right? And if you get to the poles, then it's almost, depending on if you're in winter solstice or summer solstice, either 24 hours of darkness or 24 hours of day, right? So since we're here in the northern hemisphere, we're more kind of northern hemisphere centric. So we're actually entering winter solstice. And in Chinese philosophy, let's say, or say ancient Chinese thought, there's systems that track, you can say, this astronomical patterns, and then it's distilled into certain maps or systems or symbols. And one of the symbol systems that was developed is called the Book of Changes, right? Everything changes, right? The only constant is change, right? Everyone knows that, right? And because it's a universal experience, right? It's not just Chinese. And and that change creates a sense of uncertainty, just objectively, right? We don't know what's going to happen. And then psychologically, it creates a sense of insecurity, right? And so it's a very natural response by Homo sapiens that are conscious of birth and death, right? We know our life is going to end. I think most animals just live in the moment. They don't fear death, and when it comes, it comes, right? There's just those last moments where, yeah, it's scary, but they don't anticipate. They're not creating whole narratives or even epics to try to um, um, mollify or try to make sense of the fact that we end, right? And so along this journey of birth to death, and all the changes that occur, right? The ancient Chinese developed systems to map it, and it's codified in the Book of Changes, the I Ching or the Zhou Yi. And they use a series of lines, which are like a solid line. Think of like a toothpick or something. That's considered a yang line, and yang is like expansion or growth. You can think of the energy moving from the center to the tips of the toothpick, right? That's kind of yang energy. And then at some point, right, when you pull too far to yang extreme, it breaks, right? The toothpick breaks.
Mm.
And then when something breaks, right, it could be your favorite mug or a bone or a relationship, right? If there's meaning and value there, obviously with the bone, right, or with the certain relationships, you want to try to bring it back, right? So that's the yin direction, and that's symbolized by the two broken pieces, right, with a gap between them. That's the yin state. It's like a broken state, but that also connotes um, arrows sort of pointing towards that empty center to come back, right? Yin is sort of, you can think of like that attractive force, that magnetic force of attraction. Yang is that magnetic force of repulsion, right? And so that's kind of abstract on purpose, right? It's like, what the hell are you talking about with, magnets, right? But yes, things come together, things pull apart, right? That always happens, right? And then I use the toothpick, a very practical example, right? The toothpick breaks, you want to try to, maybe glue them back together. So there's this stance of whether you call it expansion and contraction, or yang is also like warmth, right? So you can think of that as summer, right? Noon, light, above, right, to the sky, because sky is expansive and bright. And then yin is the state of opposite, right? Night, dark, cold, and winter. So the energy as we go from fall, right? It begins, the yang energy falls, right? So there's actually a system where they map, 3 lines and then 6 lines. So there's sort of a coding of a 6-line spectrum, right? So maybe in the fall, it's like 3 yin and 3 yang, right? Because fall is when the day is half light, half dark, right? Maybe you could think of summer as all yang, right? 6, let's say, yang lines. So yang, 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 yang. It's very, very warm, bright, expansive, right? And then fall is when 3 yin lines come in. So it's half and half, right? And then the spring would be opposite, right? Or if we continue this, right? Winter would be when all the lines become yin, right? It's cold, let's say, that's one of the lines. It's dark, that's another one of the lines. There's a contraction, that's a third line. It's kind of a time where you're more in like rest and restoration and more indoors, right? So all those 6 lines are yin lines, and you can encode them with different connotations, right?
Right.
Sleeping more, right? More stillness, more quiet, right? And just like in the summer, those 6 yang lines, right? Again, yang is just an abstraction, right? It can mean different things. So in the summer, right, one of those yang lines, one of those 6 can be temperature is hotter, right? There's more daylight, right? There's more activity, etc., right? More travel, right? All these kind of yang kind of categories of action. And so when we enter towards the winter solstice, right, everything is becoming yin, 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 right? When we hit winter solstice, there's a very specific symbol that is invoked. It's actually called return, fu, which means to return or to turn back, right? So if you think about it, sometimes it's easier to talk about like the sun rising. So I'll use that example, right? The sunrise, obviously the sun is not, we're moving around the sun, or we're revolving, right? And that creates sunrise, sunset. But just from a kind of a relative point of view, sun rises on the east, right? And the sun is going up and up and up in the sky. And then at some point it reaches that maximum point, right? And anything that reaches a maximum, either it breaks, right? If you go beyond the maximum, right? It's like you overextend your arm, and you're going to break your elbow, right? Or if you or dislocate some joint like your shoulder, right? So nature usually has this idea of fu, to return, right? So when you reach that maximum ascent, right, everything in nature that stays, let's say, functional, that has a sustainable cycle, needs this wisdom of return, right? Not to go beyond, right? You can, but either you break and may never recover, right? Or it's harder to come back. So
Like unnatural, right?
yeah, you could say unnatural, which often is like cultural or man-made. We often push ourselves beyond the natural limits, right? And then that's what I spend a lot of my time addressing with my patients, right? Like they stress themselves too far beyond what their nervous system capacity can handle. So then they start to get insomnia or anxiety or depression or some kind of pain, right? Often, right? Or digestive issues, right? You push yourself too much in the nervous system, that's called a fight or flight state, right? Fight, flight, or freeze, right? The sympathetic dominance, right? And we don't know how to return. That's all yang, right? You could say we don't know how to invoke the yin, which would be like at least slow down, at least reduce, right, the things on your to-do list, right? It's like do and do and do and do. It's all do, right? I call that do. you get into some crappy situations, right? Or your health turns to do, right? And so yin would be like going into fall and winter energy, right? So all these kind of seasonal or natural kind of you could call it philosophy or wisdom, they all weave together. It's not abstract, right? Abstract is good because it keeps it at a general state and offers sort of possibility that then, of course, each person ideally takes that, let's say, more abstract philosophy or general principles, and their practice, right? Literally, the word apply, right, or practical is to then take those generalized principles that have been distilled from, let's say, culture or nature, right? The observation of these cycles, let's say, and then apply it to your life, right? And so like okay, like during the day, during the morning, or during certain phases of my career or whatever, right? I want to push it. I want to become more yang, 3 yang lines, 4 yang lines, 5 yang lines. Oh, 6 yang lines, you better be careful, right? Don't spend too much time in the go 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 do state, right? And using this kind of light sun metaphor, right, which is warmth, radiation, then everyone knows this term, right, and has experienced some extent of this called burnout, right? Hopefully, you're able to return, to reverse, to recalibrate, to restore before you reach that burnout state, right? Temporarily, maybe you can really push to your limits, like your car, right? Hit the accelerator, pedal to the metal. Like, how long can you do that before either the cops come to try to prevent you from killing yourself or other people, right? Or you just like destroy your vehicle, right? Or you run into something and lose control, right? And so the wisdom of the yin, and you can say this culture is very yang dominant, the wisdom of the yin is actually know when to, at the very least, slow down by removing your foot off the accelerator, right? And a more drastic kind of yin invocation would be not just reducing the yang, right, which is taking your foot off the accelerator, but actually invoking the yin, right, which would be what, putting your foot on the brake. Hopefully not slamming on the brake. Hopefully you don't reach that emergency state where you have to like slam on the brakes. That's like very dangerous. Like let your foot off the accelerator, and once it's all the way off, you reach that neutral point, and then you even start to depress the depression, right? Often I think depression is trying to reel us back. You depress the brakes, right, to slow down, and then ideally, right, you should stop sometimes, right? Not just go pull over to the rest stop, right? So again, it's not a metaphor, it's a metaphor, and it's actually literal, right? When you're driving, but also on the journey of your life. Hopefully you're not just 110 miles per hour or 200 kilometers per hour for all out 24/7, right? And so if you pay attention to the seasons, and not just the seasons of the year, but the seasons of the day, right? It's getting cooler, it's getting darker at, afternoon, literally, right? Afternoon, which is that max point. What should we do? Right? Go party, go drinking, go dancing. And once in a while, that's fun. But hopefully that's the exception. Hopefully, since we are nature, and the more we divorce ourselves from those natural cycles, then the more unhealthy we're going to become, right? The more aligned, and you call it circadian cycles, or monthly cycles. There's also annual cycles that we as a being or entity or a manifestation of nature, right? I am nature, nature am I. Then that would lend us more towards wellness, right? And so winter, right, if you reverse everything I said, right, and that's a beautiful philosophy too, is that flexibility. That's like the yin yang diagram. It's not like a cross, very static. It's a curve, right? It's a spiral, right? And so that connotes a kind of movement, right? None of these cardinal points of time or space are permanent. Again, the idea of change. So when winter happens, right, you're reaching that minimum point. In other words, the sun is actually at the opposite part of where you are on Earth, right? You can't see it. It's moving to like the deepest point of the valley, if you will. And then at some point it starts to rise again towards the east. You don't see it yet, right? But it's starting to come back, right? From the west sunset to the north, right, which is midnight, and then to the east, which is sunrise, right? And so the diagram, just to have a visualization, right, from that all 6 lines yin is from the bottom, one of those yin lines gets knocked out, right, or gets mended, let's say, right? and becomes a yang line at the bottom. So that's almost like a spark, right? In this case, yang is that spark of fire, of warmth. So every ending, right, you can is the simultaneously a beginning, right? When that sun reaches the maximum point, that exact point is also the point where it starts to decline, if that makes sense. So every point is, you can say, past and future, right? Every point is actually, you can say, the ending of what came before, and also simultaneously, if you keep going, right, right, you can also pause, but if you keep going on that cycle of continuous change, it is the exact simultaneous inflection point towards a new beginning, right? And we know that from everything, right? Like the end of sleep is the beginning of waking up, right? And the end of a job, right? Of course, there's often a in-between time, but then it's also the at least potential beginning of a new job that's coming, right? And so the depth of winter, right, that deepest point of maximum darkness is also simultaneously, right? We think we hit rock bottom, right? So we can't go any lower. So congratulations. When someone hits rock bottom, I don't mean it in like a uncompassionate way, but congratulations in the sense that you can't become more yin. Right? Like you can't become more sad. You can't become more afraid or anxious. It's like you hit rock bottom. And that's the again, the word right? Rebound. And then it's kind of, you start to reach towards the warmth. You start to reach towards the light. You start to have hope again, right? Of a new kind of new chapter. And that is the philosophy behind actually Wing Chun, right? So Chun, as we said before, is spring, the Cantonese ish, because I'm not super fluent in Cantonese, Chun in Mandarin, of the next season, right? So that one spark, yeah, actually is the beginning. Spring hasn't started yet, right? We're at the depths of winter, mid-winter, right? Winter solstice, the longest night, let's say 14 hours of darkness, 15 hours of darkness, 16 hours of darkness, right? However, right, coming soon is, instead of 16 hours of darkness, let's say that's the max of your latitude, then, in the coming nights, it's going to be 15 hours and 59 minutes and 30 seconds of darkness, less dark, right? And then a couple nights later, maybe it's 15 hours and 58 minutes, right? 15 hours and 55 minutes of darkness, right? And what that also means is simultaneously, right? The light is, instead of just 8 hours of light, right? It's 8 hours and 10 seconds, 8 hours and 2 minutes, 8 hours and 10 minutes, right? That return of that, and you can call it spring energy or yang energy, or that spark, that vitality of like life force. And then at some point, literally in the seasons, right, you start to see new growth on the naked branches, right? It just looks like, I don't know if this tree is going to come back, my maple tree or whatever, right? And you start to see a tiny little baby leaves form, right? Or you start to see some animals start to stir, right? Birds start to chirp, or insects start to make some of their calling. And those are all kind of the drive or the impetus of survival. Like, we made it, right? That resilience through the winter that will bring in the new spring, right? And so that seems very poetic. And if you think about like a martial art, right, for self-defense, let's say, right? I mean, let's imagine a really bad situation. I don't know, like, you're kidnapped or something like that, or there's like two people attacking you, right? And you're not doing well, right? They're getting the best of you, and you could give up, right? You could just surrender, and temporarily that might be the strategy. Like, okay, this is not the time to try to spring back. It's a time to just like, okay, I survived. I'm in this really worst case scenario. My hands are tied behind my back. I'm behind a locked door in the middle of nowhere in the dark, right? It's like, okay, really worst case scenario, right? And so during that time, it might just be kind of just to gather yourself and just kind of come back to stillness for a moment, right? Because it doesn't help to like scream, right? So that's the wisdom of winter. It's like, okay, don't try to plant new seeds. Don't try to like, try to harvest fruit, go out for, so it may just be kind of come back, right? And that's true for the time of day. Ideally, you should be sleeping, right? Or in deep meditation during that time. So when it's time to, when there's an opportunity, right? This is the timing part also, right? In martial arts, right? You don't want to like, make your technique too early or too late or too fast or too slow, right? We talk about that in training. Like if you do a block too early, right, before the attack is even in range, then it's like it doesn't actually stop anything, right? And the attack may come through, right? Obviously, if you do the attack like a block too late, right, and the timing is too slow, then that's also a problem. So this is idea of seasons, cycles, and timing, and waiting for the right moment to spark that kind of energy, from like rest and relaxation to like we do practices like this, right? And sometimes it's like with a instructor doing the command, okay, ready, 3, 2, 1, and then right, you do a movement to act, and overcome that hesitation, that freezing, and kind of that spark, that moment where the sprout breaks the ground, into the new season of spring. So that's the energy that we invoke. But it's good, actually. I don't think we ever talked about it relative to winter, right? We have to acknowledge, like, okay, winter is a time of restoration and rest, right? Obviously, those are like more positive connotations. Sometimes we think winter is like scary and dark, yes. But when we're using it as a training philosophy, winter means like that relaxation, that pause, right? That patience, before you launch the technique, right? Whether it's in a guard position or just a standing position. That's like winter energy, rest. I call it relaxed and ready, right? And then at some point, you don't want to just be relaxed and just like right. And then when the trigger comes, you're not ready to act, right? And you don't want to be just ready and not relaxed, because that can lead to a lot of tension, right? Like right. So you see like a very high level athlete, right? Before the game or before the ready set go, right? As a sprinter or the swimmer, they're in a very ready state, right? But actually relatively relaxed, right? And that balance of yin and yang, right? Let's say relaxed is yin, readiness is yang, is actually very beautiful. And then to be able to toggle between the two, right? Obviously, if you want to get out of bed or you want to get a task done, you should invoke that action, that readiness, spring energy, let's say, spring and summer energy. But that is not sustainable to hold 24/7, 365, right? We should also become a master of going into fall and winter, which is like, okay, the danger is gone. Can I, breathe? Can I have mental, psycho, neurological, neuromusculoskeletal control of my system, even my internal organs, like my adrenal glands, right? Can I talk to them and say, okay, that's enough adrenaline, that's enough cortisol. We address the threat. Let's dial it back into fall and winter mode, right? But our ancestors in Wing Chun, they decided to say, out of the 4 seasons, which one to highlight, right? They highlighted the one which is that kind of threshold between yin, right? Winter, rest, and death. And then that moment to like, okay, my life, I love my life enough, right? And that's the wing part, right? Praising, right? Recommending, eulogizing our life. We love our life so much that when the moment is right, we're going to fight back and we're going to stand up for ourselves. We're going to step forward.
Right. Yeah, that's pretty interesting what you said there. So I guess I have a follow-up question since, yeah, you said, oh, your coffee mug.
Yeah.
Good timing. Yeah, so since you actually brought up that symbol, I guess I would want to mention, because you were talking about the sticks and the lines. So for those who are watching or maybe listening, more for those who are watching, I'll put some a visual of what he's talking about. But it's kind of like the even though this Wing Chun is Chinese martial arts, the Korean flag, right? So I think that's the image there. So it has the yin and yang, like on your coffee mug, and the flag has the I don't know what you the
We would call
trigrams.
those trigrams, yeah, the three
Yeah,
lines. I talked about
trigrams.
the 3 line and the 6 line,
Yeah.
but yeah, they have 4 of the 8 trigrams, which we could talk about if you like. But yeah, it's even in like hidden in plain sight that you see it. Everyone's seen the Korean flag, yeah.
Right. And that comes from mainly Taoism, correct? That
Yeah, I mean,
mhm.
a lot of people say that, like the yin and yang, but I would say even in Confucianism, actually, which is also indigenous Chinese, let's say psycho-spiritual or psychosocial, psycho-spiritual social system, which some people see as like, oh, very strict, and it's about like, like Confucian hierarchy and like, emperor and the minister and the father and the son, more patriarchal. I think that's not completely fair. I would say every healthy society needs structure, right? It can't just be a free for all. And it's true. Like if you're too legalistic, then like too much straight lines, too much
Right.
discipline, then or too much culture, if you want to say it that way, imposed upon nature, then yeah, you can't. I think you can't be fully human. I think a human. I like to use the word a humanimal. The human part is like our cultural cultivation, right? The word culture and cultivation come from the same root, right? Um, and then the animal part is like nature, right? We are animal in the sense that we're subject to nature, right? So you have human culture, right? Okay, animal nature, right? And so I like this word humanimal, and also this idea of culture, nature, or sometimes I like to say nurturing a culture that values nature, and I call that nurture nature culture, right? And so we aren't just animals, right? And just living by instinct, right? Like our, chimpanzee Z or a bonobo or a primate, sort of closest by, by whatever, if you believe in evolution or zoological analogs, right? Most similar bipedal, um, or even other animals, right? Whatever, pick your favorite mascot. Um, we are that, especially in our physiological, and we have this amazing sort of, you can say, maybe that's our hardware, right? To use another, right? Nature, hardware, animal, right? Instinct. And for the human, we have this cultural software, if you will, right? That is incredible, right? That develops and distills and codifies and systematizes and applies, all this engineering, all this ingenuity, invention, and also these also amazing philosophies too, right? Or spiritualities, as you started off the conversation with. And so this the Confucians also use the yin and yang. They also talk about the Dao.
Mm. Okay.
They also use the trigrams. Like in the Book of Changes, there are extensive Confucian commentaries as to what all those symbols mean, right? The three yang
Mm.
lines represents sky or heaven, because maybe again it's like three adjectives, if you will, right? Three qualities or three variables that can describe, let's say, sky, right? And so if I say something that, okay, one is above versus below, right? Expansive versus contracting, right? And let's say warm versus cold, or you can say bright versus dark, right? And it's like, okay, what's a good name for that picture of three yang? Okay, sky, right? And vice versa for three yin lines. Okay, maybe one of the lines can yin lines, those that broken double line, can represent descent or down, right? What's down? Okay, and okay, let's say solid or contracted. Okay, and what's relatively cool, right? Or dark? Oh, earth would be appropriate hashtag to describe that symbol of three broken lines, right? And then there's also on the Korean flag the symbol, which is two yang lines, one in the bottom position, one in the third position, right? One, two, three, right? Bottom is yang. Line one, bottom is yang. Line three, the top line is yang. Okay. What's in the middle? A yin line. So what can that look like in nature? Something that has yang on the outside, right? Above and below, right? Or if you turn it sideways, it's not like on the left and right. And then something sort of solid on the inside. And that image is actually fire, because fire usually has some kind of fuel, whether it's like wax or some kind of wax or fat, right? Or oil in the center there, right? Or wood even, right? Relatively solid material that when you ignite it, radiates yang energy on the outside, right? So yang, yin, yang, like 1, 2, 1 in terms of the symbol is fire, right? And then the fourth symbol, which is kind of the also a cardinal, right? Heaven above, earth below. Fire is usually on the left, and then water, right? I just gave it away, is on the right. Is two yin lines on the outside, right? And then a yang line in the center. Doesn't that look like a river, right? You have the two banks, relatively solid banks made out of earth, right? or soil on the two sides, right? That's and yin also relative to yang means still, right? Solid and still. And then you have a yang line in the middle of the trigram, right? This is the vertical orientation, or you turn it sideways. It's like yin, right? Yang and yin from the bottom up, right? So that's the symbol for water, because water is this kind of dynamic force, right? But usually, in order for it to be functional, right, it needs to be also banked, right? Otherwise, it would be flooding all over. So those are four of the archetypals, even alchemical, right? As above, so below, as within, so without, or like this very powerful, almost like chemical laboratory, right? The dynamic between fire and water, right? Water can put out fire, right? But fire can also heat and evaporate water, right? So that can mean our emotions, right? Or that can mean, like I talked about earlier, in terms of our activities, like, okay, too much fire, like this person is too fiery, always anxious, always angry. So then their therapist, let's say alchemical therapist, would be like, okay, we need to prescribe you water activities, right? Maybe literally go dunk your head in the in the sink or something like that, or go take a cold shower, right? So we even use this kind of expressions like in vernacular, like, okay, go take a cold shower. That's like water alchemy to kind of extinguish the excess fire, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, so all these kind of symbols again are kind of just pretty, like, okay, nice. What the hell are all these lines? And they can become immensely and intensively and extensively helpful if you know how to apply them in martial arts, right? For your nutrition, your diet, for workout, right? A lot of people maybe work out too much, right? And if you work out just right, you're getting a good return. If you work out too much, too young, then actually you don't give your body enough time to recover. So maybe you need to go more into the yin, right? If you're too yin, right, you only work out once a month, you're also not going to get results. You need to add a little bit more yang energy, which could be like frequency or speed, right, or more weights that you're using.
Yeah. And this goes back what you just mentioned to my I guess original question that kind of got your coffee mug distracted me. But but as far as like monitoring or managing, I guess your for lack of a better word, yin and yang, right?
Yeah.
How is that done? I mean, do you like have like I guess a therapist or some type of teacher, or can you monitor yourself, or do you refer back to what you said, those symbols, like I don't know, the
Yeah.
young trigram symbol, like how do you know, like
Hmm.
some people
Yeah.
and that's why I think there's a benefit of martial arts, because you have
Yeah.
like some type of self awareness,
Hmm.
but for people who uh are not self-aware,
Yeah.
like how do
Yeah.
they know, like
It's
if they're
good.
going too hard?
Good question. I talked about the culture, and I was judging our culture, critiquing our culture as being skewed towards excess yang, right?
Mhm.
So that's go go go, do, bye bye bye, right? And even this kind of like emphasis on the next new thing, right? And then even like the cult of youth, right? And whatever billion or $1 trillion industry of trying to stay young, right? Which is good, I mean, in some way, right? And that's all yang biased, right? And then things that are more yin, why I say yang biased or your yang excess, is that what's missing is the yin, which is like a celebration or equal, ideally, right? Valuation of like stillness and quiet and rest and darkness, right? And if you think about nature, it's bright during the day, right? So you should go outside, right, and absorb as much of that natural full spectrum EMF as possible. And then it's dark after sunset. And so, right, we should actually go more into the darkness, right? Maybe light some candles or something. And I don't have to elaborate here because this is not the focus, but there's um, dozens, dozens of physiological and pathological consequences of excessive artificial light at night, right? Including
Yeah.
all sorts of cancers that everyone's like scared about, right? One of the most
Mhm.
carcinogenic things is actually not enough darkness after sunset, right? And right, I say this, and 90+% of people Like maybe 10% of people are like, yeah, yeah, I know that, right? Or I've studied circadian biology, right? I understand
Right.
the importance of, like mitochondrial cycling and darkness as a powerful health signal, right? In order to a lot of people know melatonin, right, from the pharmacy or from the natural food store, right? But that's one of the most powerful hormones, right? Not just for sleep, but actually to repair our bodies, and it's only triggered when you're in the dark, right? And so most people, like I would say 80-90% of people, maybe a little bit more, I would say a little bit less people of my patients and students, because I try to educate them, are ignorant of what I just said. um, and so that's an example. If you don't know, if you grew up in a culture where, oh, it's very normal to like turn on the LEDs and and watch the screens and of TV or your phone, then it's like you don't even realize, right, that you are overstepping many thresholds of that natural cycle, right? It's unnatural. So I'm just using this as an example, right? Or like I said, sleeping too late or like eating too late, right? Where you don't give your body time, your digestive system to rest, right? If you're eating, at 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, or whatever, yeah. Um, so these are all actually common sense, but it's really uncommon nowadays. And so to your point, it's like if this is the dominant culture and we grew up like this, we're actually with so many blind spots as to what is actually functional and healthy for us. And so if you don't have mentors, right, who break out of the matrix, so to speak, right, of kind of ignorance of how culture is injuring our nature, let's say, then all sorts of consequences are going to unfold, and like everyone maybe just takes it for granted. Let's say, oh, when you get to a certain age, whatever, when you're 30 or 40, you start to decline, or like cancer or all these things. Like it's just normalization of pathology, right? I'm not going to say that if you apply circadian health principles 100% perfectly that you won't get sick, right, or you're going to live to 120, but you're giving yourself a higher probability of wellness and wholeness. And so I'm using more of a health metaphor, or health not metaphor. This is literally the case. And so you need teachers, you need mentors, you need like in martial arts, we have this kind of familial system, right? 师兄 or 师兄 or 师姐 or 师姐, where there is this community of care, and in order to transmit a gradient of wisdom and experience, right? And so if there is some kind of martial virtue to that is like we uphold the lineage, we uphold the wisdom, and we distill it over generations, right? Before I was talking about circadian wisdom. In martial arts, maybe it's wisdom about, I mean, also how to take care of your body, right? More in emergency situations, right? If someone is trying to harm you with violence, um, and without that, good luck. Like even with like AI, even maybe it's worse actually with the AI jungle out there, wild west, is that how do you distill like information that has been tested uh, in an incarnate way, right, with biological embodiment, versus something that's just sounds great, and it may be great actually. I'm not saying that all AI information is slop. However, one huge bridge missing, which is monkey see, monkey do. Let's say, right? Do you think, uh, uh, you know, talking about screen again, right? Something you read on your screen, even if it's in very clear black and white, literally writing, and everything you say is like complete logic, makes so much sense that that's information at best, right? But is there inspiration there sufficient for you to actually then go into implementation? And those three, information, inspiration, and implementation, I found are the three necessary steps to actually reach integration. And I think one of the biggest empowerments in terms of inspiration is to see someone else that is not a robot, not a virtual whatever, Sifu, um,
Sifu agent.
Sifu agent, Sifu AI, or something like that, is actually a person, flesh and blood, you know, um, bone and muscle and skin, that especially with martial arts, right? But actually with everything. in human culture. Maybe someone can self-inspire enough, is self-aware enough, right, that they can take the information and implement it properly and sufficiently and with long enough time to actually reach integration. But I doubt it actually at this stage. Like, so it's not even just information, right? It's actually the back and forth too, right? So
Right.
so how do you know like that what you think you know, one is actually the truth, right? And then also, even if it is are you applying it properly, right? And without like someone, you can call it a master or sifu or expert or adept or a mentor, I don't see a way. That's my bias. Maybe future humans would laugh at me, but yeah, so
Yeah.
absolutely
Mhm.
necessary to have a good teacher or teachers, and also actually also as powerful. It's not just you, the single disciple following your sifu master on the mountain by yourself, right, and training in the cave, and that's great. That's like private lessons, and that's good. Like much of my journey has been in that form, but never actually really quite exclusively, because at the same time I usually also started teaching, right? Within 6 months to 1 year of learning, right, my teachers would encourage me to teach, and that's huge too. And that's already creates a gradient. It's not just from your teacher to you, but from you to your students. And you learn so much from teaching, right? Based on what your students are struggling with, and asking questions and encountering problems that you never did. And so it almost amplifies your diversity of experience by witnessing and helping to troubleshoot and resolve their individual sort of karma, right? So all the practitioners, I would say, all the masters that I've met, right, world-class teachers over the years, none of them have not been teachers themselves, right? Double negative for you, meaning all of them, I think, could have only reached that level of mastery by interactive interpretation and instruction and integration, as a mentor, as an instructor. And the third variable is then also colleagues, that kind of community of care, that kind of holy culture where there's actually exemplars at all levels, right? It's not just you, as you followed your master for 1 year, but your master has like 40 years of experience. Like sometimes that can feel overwhelming, right? To bridge that
Right.
gap. But you have older brothers and sisters, older training siblings that have been training for a year and a half, 2 years, for 3 years, for 5 years, for 10 years. So you can actually see incarnated within the sangha, within the community, um, role models that are like stepping stones, right? The staircase steps aren't like 10 feet tall, like how do you see people, at each of the micro steps, so the steps are a little bit of a more manageable gradient, right? It's like 6-inch steps rather than 6 feet steps.
Wow. So good, very good points there. And I'm thinking, I think you're like subliminally or subconsciously like influencing me because you did mention, I believe, some Buddhist terms, what you just talked about there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and Buddhism is another, I guess, spiritual practice or influence in the Chinese culture, which came down to the martial arts, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, and in particular, I think, tell me if I'm wrong, but like most Chinese martial arts, they go to, I guess, they say that it comes from the Buddhist influence is from a specific part, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
they call it like Chan or Zen in
Mm-hmm.
Japanese.
Yeah.
Um, I wonder if you could just give some insight on, I
Mm-hmm.
guess, Wing Chun or Chinese martial arts in general. Like,
Yeah.
what is that? Because we see the Buddhist monks,
Uh-huh.
and they're practicing, but you know, how does their spiritual practice carry over to the martial practice?
Yeah. A couple things there, right? So
Mhm.
Buddhism, we think maybe, uh, I mean, we should think Nepal and India, right? Where the
Right.
Buddha, the archetype of the Buddha became incarnate, right? And Gautama, Siddhartha Gautama, at Bodh Gaya, right, under the tree. under the Bodhi tree, right? Bodhi, which means like awakening, right? And just to note, right, Buddha just means awakened one, right? And therefore, if you are learning and you're growing, right, and making mistakes, and taking the shame and blame and pain and anger and fear and anxiety and worry of that energy, right, of realizing that you fell short, and not letting it destroy you, right, or suicide you, you decide to take that raw material, that pain, and alchemize it into like taking the bullshit, so to speak, and turning it into compost, right, to fertilize version 2.0, and then you fail again, version 3.0, right? That's very much like, you can say, alchemical, or a Buddhic kind of process, right? Awakening is not just, of course, there's maybe that ultimate awakening, right? Satori, or whatever, awakening, enlightenment, right? But and there's a lot of relative truths that you awaken to, in that, years at least, if not decades processed, so I'm not going to claim myself as a capital B Buddha, but I have, right, maybe like a baby Buddha, awakened to certain truths, and it's been painful because I thought I knew, right, or I thought I integrated, but I was only at the information level, right?
So you're woke.
Yeah, woke. Yeah, for unfortunately, that label, like back in the day when you're woke, that was actually a cool thing, right? Like, but now it changed, to awoke, yeah, awoke Buddha, right? But my sense is just in terms of like, um, expanding your awareness of greater consciousness. Consciousness is capital C, and we're all in sort of subsets of capital C consciousness, and some would say that that's God, right? As omniscience, right? Omniscience as capital C consciousness, full or total consciousness of everything, right? You're even conscious of like bacteria. You're even conscious of the heartbeat of black holes or whatever. Like that's very high level. And most humans, let's say, are their awareness as like a field of, like a flashlight, right? It's only shining on, they can only see like one tiny uh, uh, bubble to make it three-dimensional, or one circular frame, right? Depending on the aperture of their mind, right? And the mind space is often cluttered with a lot of crazy thoughts, right? So it's not even transparent, right? So one is actually the aperture that you can expand your mind to, but it's like clearing. Like some people have floaters, like I do. It's like clouded, right? So can you clear that debris to actually see more of that awareness space, right? And so that's all like kind of like, and you can use martial alchemy, right? You can use like emotional alchemy, identity alchemy, right? Indian alchemy, Sufi alchemy, Taoist alchemy, Buddhist alchemy, whatever, esoteric, Christian alchemy, whatever, right? We talked about alchemy before. And so that whole lineage, or that whole school, and there's multiple schools of Buddhism, right? It's like incredible, like dozens, if not hundreds, of schools of thought within Buddhism, right? And then Bodhidharma as the, let's say, legendary or actual figure that came from India to the Shaolin Shi, right, the southern Shaolin temple, and saw that the monks were too much in yin practice, right? They were just meditating on stillness and quiet, but their bodies were not healthy. So teaching them some form of Indian martial arts, right? Maybe it's Kalari, I don't know, right? Some form of that. In order to also train their physical vehicle too, right? And so you can say that's the tradition of Chan, right? When it got to Japan, right? Because some of the first of that lineage in the U.S. were like D.T. Suzuki, right? So he was Japanese, and so they used the term Zen, Z-E-N, right? Which actually derived from Chinese Chan, which actually derived from Indian Buddhism, right? So that's when the spiritual and the martial kind of mixed. And then we know these, performers now, to be a bit critical of, from the Shaolin Temple, these kind of warrior monks, right? And so I don't want to get too much into the politics of it, but like, which if I use the word for performative as a critique, it's like maybe now it's too much like just the martial and too much just like the physical. And obviously, I mean, what they can do is incredible, right? So you can't even tease out the psychological, the emotional, the physical, and the spiritual. It's like all one being. Um, but I would say the illusion, the danger, just like Western like yoga, it's like, oh, it's about stretching, it's about like looking sexy or whatever, like meditation to improve your corporate profits. um, it can be sort of appropriated for just like material and performative, right? Or virtue signaling. And so it's hard. I just say that as like a inquiry, right? As a contemplation about like spiritual bypassing and like losing the essence of why we actually cultivate internally. Um, and so that's kind of one thread of the spiritual and the religious even and the martial from a more kind of Buddhistic kind of very very superficial sketch of like a meta history. Then you also have now the Taoist side, which is the legend is Wudangshan, right? Wudang Mountain, and where there's this again legendary, semi-legendary, apocryphal figure of Zhang Sanfeng, who also just like the legend of Wing Chun, studied animals, right? Animal movements and animal interactions to develop the lineage of Wudang martial arts, right? Which people consider more Taoist martial arts, right? And supposedly, right, created Taiji Chuan. Some say Taiji Chuan was created by the Chen family, right, in the Chen Jiago, Chen village. So, but maybe it's possible that multiple martial arts invoke this term Taiji, right? Which is this is one of the most popular forms of it, right? So just because the Chen family say they invented Taiji Chuan, and then the Wudang, people say no, Taiji started in Wudang, it couldn't mean like they just whoever the ancestors of these two different schools, right, actually just use the same term because Taiji is a beautiful term. Taiji is like the dance of duality, which is very relevant to martial arts, right? Offense yang, defense yin, right? Yang is fast, yin is slow, right? Yang is extending, and then yin would be flexing, right, or withdrawing, right? Um, and then like sometimes in Wing Chun we talk about simultaneous yin and yang, right? Someone attacks and you defend and offend at the same time. So not to get too much into the whole Wudang Taoist thread, but then that's another kind of spiritual martial kind of lineage that is invoked. And then you could say then there's a whole like tradition of like folk or family martial arts that were developed, and then we could inquire into why that is the case. I mean, once we became domesticated and we needed it also as nomadic tribes, especially for hunting, right? That's maybe our first martial art. When we started to build walls and like had like excess like food that we needed to store, right? We needed to defend it against whatever people that were lazy and wanted to steal our food because they didn't actually plant well in the spring, summer, and fall. And it's winter now. They want to kind of go into the granaries, and so maybe that's also through defense. We learned to kind of test out certain martial arts, right? Oh, the bandits have been able to get past all our defenses, so we better up our game, right? And so kind of like a martial arts arms race, and then like the Choi family or the Hong family, the Chen family, these are martial art, Honggar, right? Hongquan or Cha Li Fu, right? Choi Li Fut. Or like I said, Chen style martial arts, Chen style Tai Chi, but there's also Wu style and Wu style, and then Sun style, and so all these, family lineages of martial arts that were developed in the Jianghu, sort of in the Wild West, or in the sort of folk field of China, also is a kind of another thread.
Hmm. Yeah, that's interesting because yeah, you have I guess the major uh influences of philosophy, spirituality, then you have the folk
Mm-hmm.
types where it's kind of like I guess in different regions they had their own
Yeah.
separate beliefs. Like
Yeah.
I guess the well no, I think you mentioned before, Confucianism, that has like ancestor worship. I'm not sure if they
Hmm.
borrowed it
Also.
from the folk, they evolved it from the folk or what.
Hmm.
But yeah, that's interesting. And then you have maybe some shamanistic
Yeah.
beliefs as
Hmm.
well.
Hmm.
So I
For
think
sure.
that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
One other thing I'm just curious about, and I guess this will be the last thing we'll talk about is
Okay.
we talked about the Zen, and I guess the Japanese have
Hmm.
they brought that aspect of Buddhism, and they're famous for like the Budo, the warrior code or whatever,
Hmm.
right? Way of the warrior. Is I'm not sure if that was influenced by the Chan Buddhism, or was that developed like, because I guess every culture has like some type of code, right? But
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
specifically those aspects, was that from the Chan Buddhism, or can you speak on that if you know anything about
Yeah.
that?
Um, I think so, yes. And I'm not an expert in teasing out exactly the threads, but then Japan also has, right, indigenous animistic and shamanistic um spiritual lineages, right?
Right.
Like Shinto, right? Shintoism as well. So I think I'd say as a martial artist, as a warrior, as a fighter, um, it's like a weapon. And if you care about culture, if you have some compassion of other people, right? It's important to have safeguards and controls on any form of power, whether it's political power or nuclear power, or financial power too. That's a whole interesting, it can be weaponized too, right? Financial devices, like fiat currencies, etc. But I think in a moral society, uh, there are in relationship to these weapons, right? And could be the list that I listed, but or listed that I kind of laid out. But in terms of martial arts, like say if me, right, uh, as a martial artist who has developed the capacity uh, of violence to a very efficient level, like for instance, like I don't know, I don't want to create some scary scenarios, but like say with my skill set, if I wanted to, maybe I could kill like 50 people, right? Or whatever, right? Hopefully, and I don't mean that. Okay, whoever's listening, okay, I'm not gonna do that, but I'm just saying like in terms of like um the um the intensity or the it's like horsepower, right? 50 horsepower, 100 horsepower, 500 horsepower. So there are some martial artists who are very dangerous, right? Um, who, if they really wanted to, or this is like again atomic weapons or nuclear weapons, nuclear bomb, could do a lot of damage, right? And hopefully there are multiple layers of safeguards. It's not just like one big red button sitting on the president's desk that they could that's accessible anytime there's he's upset, right? Or whoever. I'm not talking about any particular president, but it's
Right.
even like with guns, right? Ideally you don't just have the gun sitting on your coffee table, right, in your living room where anyone who comes in to visit, right, can, and it's loaded, right, and there's no safety on, like that's just not wise. That's not even just like moral. I mean, it is not moral, but it's just stupid, right? And so hopefully like even just like you don't have to be like a high level philosopher to realize that okay, there should be codes, there should be precautions, there should be a moral system, um, ethical safeguards to prevent people from exerting violence. In this case, just wanton without any mores. Yeah. If if I did not know this, if I was not wise enough, and I taught my martial art, my very dangerous and effective martial art to some students, and they, because they didn't have the moral guidance or the emotional maturity, and just because whatever someone called them a bad name, right, or there was some misunderstanding, they went and just killed someone, like I would feel really guilty, right? If I have any humanity, right? um and maybe that happened, maybe something like that happened, right, and it was an accident. However, and there's consequences, maybe very painful consequences. Maybe, you know, we went to prison or something like that. But let's say ideally, maybe, you know, like the consequences weren't so dire. No one died, okay, but one of my students hurt someone, right, and maybe caused some injury, but there was enough capacity for understanding and forgiveness that, okay, you know, it was able to be repaired, right? It wasn't that bad of an injury. That would prompt me like, oh, that was a close call. I don't want anything like that to happen again. So I'm gonna be much more careful about who I teach. Um, I'm going to, you know, kind of maybe do like a background check in a way, like who are their parents, you know, like, you know, do they have a tendency towards just like, you know, like aggression, right? That's kind of like the negative side, right? The positive side is, do I see signs like, okay, they're actually very service oriented, or they have self-awareness and compassion, right? Um, and are careful, right? This conscientious, these kind of things, empathetic. So I think that's kind of my experience where these codes could have developed. And of course, if I'm in China, right, I would borrow from whatever spiritual system, because most spiritual systems have also developed moral codes and ethical codes. Often because, like, say with Christianity, it's like, um, you know, love thy neighbor as oneself, right? Um, and if you go deeper into the esoteric essence of tradition of spirituality, it's like we are all one. So not just as a doctrine, okay, love thy neighbor as thyself, right? Because that's more prescriptive, right? And some are proscriptive, right? Don't treat your neighbor as you don't want to be treated, right? It actually comes from a sense of mystical union, right? Where you get into such depths of spiritual attunement, to the ineffable, to the mystery, to the Gnostic, that when you go into that state, you feel in a higher consciousness, or incarnate, like, um, um, emanation, that the none of these 8 billion other humans are other than thyself. Okay, like, so if you hurt someone, it literally harms yourself, right? And so for those who don't have that as a primary experience, then you need to write the scripture. Then you need to write like the Ten Commandments, right? Which can approximate in a secondhand form, behavior level, which, what for a mystic is not behavioral. It's actually union. It's actually identification. Right? Um, and so, right, spiritual and martial, right? Maybe I have a friend, right, who's like the abbot of a Taoist temple, or you know, Fa Shi, some Chan master, and I consulted them. Oh, this happened in my school. What should I do? So, oh, okay, here, read this Buddhist text, or read this Taoist scripture. I was like, oh wow, this is great. Like, it's already, you know, it's a turnkey. I don't have to come up with my own virtues, you know. But I'll call it Wu Dao, right? And man, Wu means martial, Dao means like a path, or Budo, right, in Japanese, or Wu Shi Dao, right? Shi means a practitioner, or like a knight, right, or an adept or an expert. So Bushido in Japanese, right? And even in the West, right, there's kind of like a knight's code, right? Because like valor was important. You just, you know, you have all these weapons and military prowess. You don't just go into the village and pillage for no reason, right? There should be some ideals and some reason where you would actually fight and kill, right? Um, and so in Japan, right, they maybe formalize it even more, because of historically there was the development, and the differentiation, the specialization of a warrior class called the samurai, right, who served, right, the sovereigns, the royals, right, and so they were retained as like bodyguards or defenders, or even, you know, offenders too. And so in order to maintain their reputation, like, because, you know, the Japanese as a society, I don't know all the historical evolution of that, but like etiquette and, you know, like expression, even if it's like through ritual, is very important as a way of communicating meaning. And so a lot of these things became ritualized. You think about like Japanese like matcha tea ceremony, right, which was imported from the Tang Dynasty in from China into Japan. But they're very good at like formalizing, systematizing, even with like modern technology, right? Like what they did with like, you know, um, their first encounter with like firearms, right? Or later on, like the first encounter with cars or with like, like cell phones, right? They're so good at like re-engineering, right? Including social engineering. That is these kind of moral codes. So all this kind of cultural background and then also historical development. Then everyone knows the samurai, right? They became these amazing, incredible living weapons. And they were also quite controlled politically, right? And part of that included like ethical systems until like some of these kind of political structures fell apart, and some of these samurai lost connection with their I don't know, I don't think you would call it dojo, but with their class, and then they became known as ronin, right? They became these wandering like uh, uh, former samurais without a master, without a retainer, and then some of them went off the moral code, right, and became maybe a little bit more wild because they weren't subject to the subjugation of these moral systems. And some developed their own personal kind of Bushido code. So yeah, so those are some things that I can share about that.
Cool. Good insights. Yeah, some of that stuff I didn't know or think about. So yeah, I think that's a good place to stop here. Um, I hope people, uh, got some good insight and some good education, maybe some tips on how to, I guess, go forward in the future. Use the spirituality and philosophy uh, to enhance their lives. And martial arts is a good vehicle. It's not the only vehicle, but it's a good vehicle to do that. So,
Yeah, I think.
mhm,
Oh, just one last thread about the martial and spiritual, just to tie it in a little bit, is that it talked about life and death, or birth and death, right? As the yin and yang of life, or maybe the yang and yin. Yang is birth, yin is death. And that I think in terms of meaning, which I brought up, is that
mhm.
you can just live according to whatever conventional status quo life and just follow the story that they program into you. But I would say at some point, most people, they face some breakdown or challenges that make them question the normative story. Is it actually right for them? And temporarily, like they may lose meaning. Oh, I thought I was this. I thought they were that. And there's a breakdown, right? Sort of, let's say in the material and the physical and the external. And ideally, then some people lose all meaning, right? And then suicide is the thing, or they just kind of become a zombie. But I would say whether it's martial alchemy, like we talked about last time, to take that raw material of pain and darkness, and transform it through some kind of cultivation or training, right? And of course, we're biased towards some kind of somatic training. Psychotherapy is great, but I think there's something really powerful about engaging with movement and flow and letting the energy run into not just your head, but also into your limbs, right? Um, and how I think many people have found in those moments where things break down some useful answers in the spiritual traditions, whether it's Zoroastrianism or Hinduism or some indigenous lineages. I don't think it really matters. I'm of the persuasion that we have access to, again, like all this information, and ideally there are legitimate teachers that you can connect to, and ultimately you have to digest it and integrate it and make it your own. um, I'm a little bit critical of like the mishmash, a little bit of Daoism, a little bit of Buddhism, a little bit of Orthodox Christianity, a little bit of New Age. And it's okay, like, because a lot of these lineages that were contiguous have been destroyed in the last century. And so it's not, if I'm critical, right, I would say, oh, blind leading the blind. If I'm a little bit more less critical, I'll be like, we're all doing our best, and some of us are going back to, like Plato or Socrates. Some of us are going back to like Confucius or some of these other traditions to draw from and reconstitute and then resurrect them in a new way that's relevant, accessible to modern life. So yeah, I just wanted to tie a little bit together there to answer some of these questions of life or death.
Mhm. Yeah, and I guess that brings it back to, I guess, the time of the year, the solstice. So,
Yes, death.
so, well, death and like you said, there's a renewal, right? Life
Renewal,
part
rebirth.
two.
Yes.
So hopefully, the audience can take some of these tidbits of wisdom and
Mm.
renew themselves or move forward,
Yeah.
improve themselves. So, all right,
Yes.
Sifu Paul. So thank you for the inspiring talk as always. Very educational,
You're welcome.
very very spiritual today. So yeah, so just to recap, so WingChun Workout, we do have holiday sale. So if you want to check that out, go to the website, wingchunworkout.com.
Hmm.
We're also on Patreon. And if you are in need of some, I guess, some healing or just to check out Sifu Paul, if you're in the area, check them out. So go to daocenter.com
Hmm.
and I'm sure he'll respond to any messages there. And you also have an Instagram, right? At
Yeah.
Sifu Paul Wang.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Email is info@daocenter, daocntr.com. And I also use social media as a way to kind of put things out there. So Instagram, it's at Sifu, Sifu, Paul Wang, Wang, and at Instagram, and that also connects to like my Facebook. But I also have a Substack that I'll probably leverage and put out more articles in this coming year, and that's at Daoology, Daology, Daoology at Substack. Yeah.
Awesome. And we are also on the not so much X. I need to post more on X, but we're on the socials as well. So Instagram, Facebook, um, YouTube, of course. All right. So Sifu Paul, until next time, if I don't hear
Yeah.
from you, happy happy what do we call it? Happy
Oh,
season. Happy
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 season,
happy
happy
equinox.
season, yeah. Holy days, equinox, and yeah, also the end of the snake year, going into the year of the fire horse. So that should be exciting.
Awesome. Cool.
Yeah.
All
Okay.
right.
Take care until
Okay.
then. Yeah.
All
Bye
right.
bye.
Bye-bye.